The heat is to maybe pop inside of a movie theater, and you see Forrest Hartman here, so you know there's a big release going on this week. Thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely. Always great to be here, Court.
And you're talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is something that wasn't really on my radar until you mentioned it, and then I saw the previews for it, and I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of this yet. It's the new Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. People are big film buffs. It's been on our radar because Quentin Tarantino doesn't release a movie every year, so when he releases one, it's like, oh, got to see it. And some really big stars in this. We've got Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, the big stars, but we've also got Margot Robbie and Al Pacino, and I mean, the list goes on. Kurt Russell. This is a star-studded cast.
Which isn't out of the norm for a Quentin Tarantino movie. A lot of actors like to work with him.
Right.
What did you think of this movie?
Well, I liked it a lot. I've got to say, this is a movie that plays for 2 hours and 41 minutes, so get ready to settle in, and sometimes films like that drag. You know, Quentin Tarantino, he can be a little self-indulgent at points. There are probably places he could have trimmed, but watching the movie, I didn't feel that way. You know, I was hanging in with him on every scene, and I really enjoyed it. The only thing, and this is where it's tough to be a movie critic, I'm not sure how I feel about the ending yet, but that I think is a good thing because it's one of those films where I left the theater thinking, and I'm like, boy, I gotta think about that one a little more.
That's kind of how I felt at the end of Pulp Fiction, so maybe a little similar there. And we were talking a little bit before we came out here on air, and you were saying that this isn't actual history, but it's shot that way.
Yeah, I guess you would call it alternative history. Quentin Tarantino likes to do this. We saw him do it with Inglourious Basterds also, where he took kind of an alternative look at World War II. In this, he takes an alternative look at Hollywood during the Tate LaBianca murder period, for people who remember that. So we have famous figures in there like Sharon Tate and Bruce Lee, you know, classic historical figures, but they're presented in a fictionalized manner.
Okay, and then who's the audience for this one, do you think? I'm assuming it's a little bit of an older audience.
Yeah, I would say a little older. It's an R-rated film. It's not as hard R as some Tarantino, but it's definitely got R-rated elements, and I think you're going to get the most out of it if you're a big movie buff, because Quentin Tarantino is a big movie buff. If you know that historical era, if you know these stars, if you know a lot about Hollywood, you're going to get a lot of nuanced things that somebody who isn't as tuned into that won't get.
Okay, and then you have teenagers. Would you take them with you to this film?
You know, if your teenager is okay with most R-rated movies, that they're probably going to be fine with this. If not, then keep them away, because it's definitely an R-rated film.
Okay, and then real quick, just 1 out of 10, what'd you think?
I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10. Like I said, still digesting it, but I think it's well worth seeing.
8 out of 10, not too bad. Forrest, thanks so much for coming in.
Absolutely.
Cecile?